Orlando wasn't afraid to call you at 2 or 3 in the morning either with something important, and he did.
Realize his commitment to the Hispanic community. Also, his accomplishments only by knowing that he was a professor at Kean University with the highest level of professorship.
¿Qué voy a decir de Orlando? Tengo muchísimos recuerdos. Es más, me he puesto esta corbata que me la regaló él, que le gustaban las cosas de calidad. Dice Pierre Cardin, París. Esas y muchas otras cosas con Orlando hemos pasado veranos entrañables.
I would say that first he was a friend. Then, in many ways, he was a mentor, and in a great number of ways, he was an educator for all of us, because he brought all of us together and taught us about each other.
Orlando was always had a nice comment about people, you know what I mean? And even sometimes a joke, you know. He was a serious person, but they had that casual, you know, way of being.
Hola a todos y a todas. He recibido con mucha tristeza el fallecimiento del doctor Orlando Edreira, que me envían en el periódico de La Voz, mis amigos de Elizabeth. Bueno, era una noticia casi esperada, pero la pena es ya muy grande cuando sabemos que nos ha dejado Orlando Edreira. Pero solo nos ha dejado en parte, porque otra parte de él, su alma, su energía, va a seguir viva entre nosotros toda nuestra vida. Yo tuve la oportunidad y la suerte de conocer a Orlando Edreira en el año 1990. Me lo presentó un amigo común, Urbano Venero. Nos presentó cuando él era profesor de Kean University y yo era profesor y director de los cursos de verano de la Universidad de Cantabria, aquí en España, en Torrelavega. A partir de ese momento iniciamos Orlando en Elizabeth y yo aquí en Cantabria una relación de permanente amistad, de participar en cursos, en talleres educativos, en seminarios. Él venía por los veranos a Santander, traía muchos alumnos. Aquí tengo algunas fotos que vamos a ir viendo después. Podemos ver a Orlando con un grupo, pues aproximadamente de unos 30 estudiantes de Elizabeth, de Kean University, que estaban durante 15 días practicando, mejorando el idioma español. Y a la vez también, pues él me invitaba a la universidad, a Kean University, y aquí también tengo otra foto que veremos más tarde, donde yo daba una clase en el semestre de verano de psicología general, que era mi especialidad, soy psicólogo. ¿Qué voy a decir de Orlando? Tengo muchísimos recuerdos. Es más, me he puesto esta corbata que me la regaló él, que le gustaban las cosas de calidad. Dice Pierre Cardin, París. Esas y muchas otras cosas con Orlando hemos pasado veranos entrañables. A Orlando le gustaba mucho venir a Santander y voy a descubrir uno de los motivos, o varios motivos. En Santander vivió unos años, o unos meses, perdón, José Martí, que ya sabéis que bueno, pues es el libertador de Cuba y al que Orlando le profesaba también una especial devoción. Martí vivió en Santander y Orlando venía a ver la casa donde vivió Martí. También le gustaba mucho venir a Santander porque aquí vivía también el padre Macho. El padre Macho es un sacerdote español, aquí también de Santander, que participó en el desembarco de la bahía de Cochinos. Bueno, era un cura que acompañaba pues, a los soldados, a los guerrilleros de la bahía de Cochinos. Y a Orlando le encantaba. Pasábamos tardes escuchando las aventuras del padre Macho durante su tiempo en Cuba, en fin, todo lo que pasó cuando le cogieron preso y luego también cuando le liberaron y se vino a vivir a Cantabria. Cada verano también íbamos a la ciudad de Torlavega, que también le encantaba mucho a Orlando. ¿Por qué? Porque la ciudad de Torlavega y la Habana Vieja, por algún motivo también de amistades, se han hecho ciudades hermanas. Y en esta ciudad de Torlavega hay una preciosa estatua dedicada a José Martí. Estos motivos para él eran muy entrañables, le hacían muy feliz. Ya sabemos que a él le encantaba la historia de Cuba y entonces le encantaba estos recuerdos que hay en España de Cuba, porque por casualidad, o no por casualidad, Santander y La Habana son dos ciudades que han estado muy cercanas. Aquí en el siglo XIX y en el siglo XX había un barco que cada 2 o 3 meses hacía la ruta Santander-La Habana, La Habana-Santander, donde iban y venían lo que aquí llamamos indianos, que eran los emigrantes o trabajadores españoles que vivían en Cuba, y cubanos que también les gustaba venir a España. Después con Orlando también hemos pasado unos veranos preciosos en un apartamento que él tuvo en el Mediterráneo, donde pues, nos acompañaban otros amigos, como en este caso un verano vino con nosotros el juez Roberto Alcázar. También Orlando trajo a Santander al rector de Kean University para organizar unas jornadas científicas. También Orlando invitó a venir a Cantabria a la profesora Teresita Estrada, y a su esposo Ángel Estrada. Otros amigos también de Orlando, de Elizabeth, viajaron a Santander. La Universidad de Cantabria hizo un convenio con la Universidad Kean University para enviar estudiantes de Cantabria a Elizabeth. Como podéis ver, han sido muchas actividades, todas ellas patrocinadas, apoyadas, apadrinadas por el doctor Orlando Edreira. ¡Qué grande! ¡Qué pequeño era y qué grande! Siempre les recordaremos. Estoy deseando, cuando se acabe esta pandemia, regresar a Elizabeth para volver a ver la universidad donde él trabajaba, el apartamento donde él me recibía a mí y yo me hospedaba con él el tiempo de mi trabajo, y a otros amigos que compartimos Orlando Edreira y yo. Quiero nada más ya dejar un recuerdo, porque yo sé que hay muchos amigos que van a seguir hablando en este vídeo, y mi recuerdo va a ser pues lo que a él le encantaba, que era la música cubana, José Martí. Y para eso pues tengo el mejor recuerdo para él. Quiero dedicar la poesía de José Martí, Cultivo la Rosa Blanca, que se escucha mucho en la canción de Guantanamera. Cultivo la rosa blanca en junio como en enero, para el amigo sincero que da su mano franca. Orlando, te queremos, te recordaremos.
How Orlando and I met. Many years ago, Orlando always was talking about the Spanish community in Elizabeth, and that's how we met. What factor kept us communicating? Orlando was a member of the Board of Education, as well as me later on with the years. And at the time that I was a member of the board, Orlando always called me at 7 o'clock in the morning and always remind me about the curriculum of inclusion. Can I share a significant event about Orlando? Orlando later on became a member of the city council. And at the time, always was talking about the Hispanic community, and he helped a lot of people. What do you feel that shaped you in your relationship with Orlando? I always kept a friendship, and I always communicating about other people and the help for other people. Please give us 3 words, the sum of Orlando. Bright and intelligent and down to earth. Always had a nice comment about people, you know what I mean? And even sometimes a joke, you know. He was a serious person, but they had that casual, you know, way of being. As a great, honest person, helpful to the people.
I currently sit on the board of trustees of the Elizabeth Historical Society. For 7 years, I served as president of the organization, succeeding Orlando, I should say, and worked with him on a number of historical issues. He was an ardent supporter of the Historical Society, and I learned a great deal from him, both as an interviewee where he stressed his many endeavors for the city of Elizabeth, as well as the difficulties in immigration from Cuba, his native place. On one occasion, dinner with a close friend, I witnessed what Orlando called a distinctive Cuban celebration. After dinner, coffee in a demitasse with at least 4 spoonfuls of sugar. I'd never seen anybody do that before. He said it was an inheritance from growing up near the cane fields. He was a wonderful raconteur and kept the conversation so lively throughout the evening. My professional relationship with Orlando developed while we worked together, founding the Elizabeth Historical Society. But that was not where we first met. That event was a function of Orlando stepping over the usual political considerations in hiring to fill the special education spot with my wife, who came with a doctorate from Columbia University. Anything less than a full-blown professional would not be able, so Orlando argued, to negotiate the multiple legal and financial issues of the position. He was not only correct, but enabled my wife to relocate into Elizabeth, the native city of her mother, whom she brought with her. It was during the negotiations with my wife, Dr. Jane Mattingly, that Orlando and I first met. Subsequently, we had a number of wonderful social events together. The special role Orlando Edreira played in Elizabeth had much to do with his ability to serve as a politician, trading and bartering resources while keeping his eye on the ultimate prize, upgrading the standards of urban education. The innumerable pressures and contesting influences in political decision-making would often involve agonizing give and takes, but Orlando's presence always ensured that the voice of educational excellence had its champion. Rather than walking away from such political exchanges, Orlando set a teachable example of how one could navigate turbulent waters without losing one's soul. I think this lesson, lived in public, may be his greatest contribution to Elizabeth and to his friends. 3 words that sum up Orlando: politician, professor, teacher. The order is ascending. Thank you.
I met Orlando over 40 years ago. A family friend of ours who was a contemporary of Orlando's, Nida E. Thomas, had invited us to a meeting, and we were new to Elizabeth, and she wanted us to get to know a few people. By us, I mean my husband Nat and me. We hired a babysitter because our son was very small then, and we went to the meeting with Nida, and there was Orlando, and it was regarding community development needs for the city of Elizabeth, and he spoke passionately about the needs for the Hispanic Latino community. And he had a few people with him, and so he spoke in English and in Spanish. After the meeting, Nida introduced us to him, and she said to Orlando, "You should really go by their house and just visit and get to know them." So my husband said, "When do you want to come by?" And there were no cell phones then. And Orlando came by, and I made a meal, and we sat, and my husband and Orlando chatted, and we understood that we shared very common issues in vision and politics. And there was another meeting somewhere else that Orlando invited us to, and that's how it began. What kept us communicating was the shared interests. And it was a time that there were very few people other than the Anglo community at the table. The amount of people of color and immigrants in the city were substantial and growing, and there wasn't a formal or organized voice. We just kept going to Orlando's meetings. He would sometimes ask us to do and write up things or research something, and we discovered that he had an impressive network of resources out there because he asked people who, out of respect for him and also personal commitment, they did it. And there was a lot of energy at that time and a lot of trust. There was people listened to each other and trusted each other. It was a very important time. And there are times that people met at midnight because it was the only time people could meet, and we did. Orlando wasn't afraid to call you at 2 or 3 in the morning either with something important, and he did. And he knocked on people's doors in the middle of the night also. His energy was impressive. You know, when you think of something significant regarding Orlando, there were so many. But I will speak to a time that he was with Senator Menendez, and he had a town meeting on the importance of the Hispanic community to the economy of New Jersey. And this was done in over 30 years ago. It was prophetic, it was disciplined, and it was transformative because people couldn't hide. They had to make and acknowledge that there were issues that had to be dealt with regarding the Hispanic community and others. How I feel that our relationship was shaped through Orlando's constant energy in asking us to do things. And sometimes he would ask us to do something that was just simply fun, and we did, and enjoyed that too. He invited us my husband and I, to a dinner in Newark, and I'm speaking of fun now, and after dinner, we got up and danced. And all of a sudden we realized that people were standing there watching us dance because they had only known of us as being Orlando's worker type people, not people that could get up and dance and have fun. And we were dancing just all by ourselves with some people watching us, amazed that we had fun and knew how to dance. We loved Orlando. He was in and out of our house all the time. He always wanted me to make him soup. He was a soup person, among other things. And he was always looking for fresh soup. And I would make him soup all the time. Sometimes just drop it off at his house if he wasn't feeling well or whatever. And yeah, we miss him. And we're very happy that he was in our life. And thank you for the opportunity to share something about Orlando and our family.
It's difficult for me to remember exactly when it was that I met Orlando, because it seems that when my wife and I moved here in the early 80s, he was always in the newspapers for political or educational activities. And by the time we met him, it seemed that we had known him forever. Once we met him, it became obvious that he would not let you go. If he felt that you could be a friend, he wanted to involve you in all the political and educational and social events that were happening here in the Elizabeth community. In my case, he brought me into HOPA, which was a political organization through which I met many people of the Hispanic persuasion that I would never have met otherwise. And I also wound up going to a number of social events with Orlando. Some of them were his family events, some of them were events of friends of his or acquaintances, political acquaintances. And we wound up being friends with his wife, his sister, and even her children. So that in some ways it became one big family. Orlando had many things that he was interested in, but education and politics seemed to dominate the relationships. And in the times that we knew him, in the 35 years, there are just innumerable times that we participated in elections together, be they for city council or for school boards. And Orlando would always make sure that you were there, introduced, and involved. In terms of how I would describe him, in the 3 words I've been asked to say, I would say that first, he was a friend. Then, in many ways, he was a mentor, and in a great number of ways, he was an educator for all of us, because he brought all of us together and taught us about each other. I'm going to miss him, but we take great joy in what he did for us and through us to bring us into the community here in Elizabeth. Thank you.
Orlando was very accessible to the members of the community, and I am a member of the community. I know he was in many activities and in many places, some of which I was able to attend. We met. I immediately realized his commitment to the Hispanic community. Also, his accomplishments only by knowing that he was a professor at King University with the highest level of professorship that the university grants. Our friendship began and continued for many years. Well, I was impressed with his commitment to the community. And I knew it was a worthy friendship. But beyond his interest in the Hispanic community and beyond his zeal for the betterment of the community, I always noticed that he was a dapper dresser. Orlando always dressed so sharply, and I admired that of him. So I asked him, and I said, Orlando, where did you get your clothes? He says, oh, I have them made in the Dominican Republic, where I spent time, and I also, as I learned, had become a lawyer. And I said, could you get me into this? I'd love to really be part of this operation with you. He says, of course, you can do this. He said, where did you get your materials? I said, well, there's a local place here in Elizabeth. I'll buy the wool, and I take it over there. And I said, wonderful. Let's go to New York and buy wool, and then we'll go together to Santo Domingo. And that became one of many trips. For 20 years, we both, well, he had it for longer than I did, but for 20 years we had our clothing made, custom made in the Dominican Republic. Yeah. Now, there were other things as well that kept us communicating, which was the interest in the betterment of the Hispanic community. He also indicated to me, once he learned that I was a lawyer, that I should be part of the judiciary. And he took an interest in that professional career. And that was also a project that he engaged himself in, and I'm glad to say that he was successful in that project. What shaped my relationship with Orlando was my admiration for him and for his commitment to the community and to his students. He taught for many, many years. I think it was over 50 years that he was a teacher in one form or another, not only here, but in Cuba as well. Teaching is a seductive characteristic, and I remember when I had favorite teachers of mine, I became much more interested in what they had to say to me. And Orlando was that kind of a captivating individual. Although he was not my teacher in my academic endeavors, I witnessed him give lectures and conferences to students, and I was impressed with his ability to give a lecture without looking at a piece of paper and speak for over 2 hours. And I can tell you that it is like reading a book that is well written. The way that it flowed, his presentations were of the highest quality. It was captivating to listen to him speak. Of course, his mastery was in Spanish. And some people who have a problem with accents may think less of someone who speaks less than perfect English. But if you only were able to understand what he had to say in Spanish, your opinion would have been very different. But Orlando was about love. It was about commitment to the community. It was about developing his students into citizens that were righteous and were well instructed. Orlando was integrity. Orlando was ethics. Orlando was honesty. Orlando was many things. Thank you all for sharing this moment with us as we bid farewell to our dearest Dr. Orlando Edreira. It is now for us to celebrate his life. I am honored to have this opportunity, but I am also challenged to do it in a brief period, for there is much to talk about. It will be a disservice to Orlando if I do not convey to you at least an essence of who he was and what he has accomplished and has done for so many. A college professor, an educator par excellence, but also an excellent student, a lawyer in 2 countries, an author, a community leader, an insatiable and indefatigable worker on behalf of the Hispanic community, a courageous fighter for inclusion, a loyal friend, a gracious and kind soul, a selfless individual, fearlessly independent, much appreciated for his sincerity, his ethics, his integrity, earning the respect and admiration of all those who came to know him. For Orlando, teaching was his true love. In the early 1950s, there were few employment opportunities in Cuba for new teachers, but a teaching position was available for an exceptional student. So much he wanted it to teach that he graduated summa cum laude, #1 student in his class of 1952 from La Escuela Normal, the top school for teachers in Havana. His reward was a classroom full of students. As he taught, he also continued his education and received a law degree from the University of Havana, considered among the top universities in the world during his time. He began to defend political prisoners, those who dare to dissent from the dictates of the Castro regime, in the tribunals of the island. So much was his zeal that his own freedom became endangered. He later learned from a cousin employed in the system who warned him of his impending arrest and commitment if he continued defending dissidents and not leave the country. He arrived in New York in the early part of the 60s decade, engaging in menial employment to support his family. He would tell me he was working in a shoe store, boxing and reshelving shoes. He later went to work at a school lab, attending to mice and rats. He intimated to me that he was often bitten by the rodents, but he did not mind it because he was working in a school. Continuing his education, he enrolled in City College of New York, where in 1965 he receives a master's degree in Romance languages, one of several master's degrees he earned. Later in 1971, he received his doctoral degree from Columbia University, an Ivy League institution, where he also joined the faculty. This is no small accomplishment, and it is an impressive inclusion on anyone's resume. During his years at Columbia, he set his eyes onto the Garden State and eventually left his coveted position in the faculty at Columbia to establish the first bilingual program in higher education at Kane University as an assistant professor at the Department of Foreign Languages, and establishing the Spanish-speaking program at Kane in the early 1970s. The program has graduated thousands of students whose first and at times only language is Spanish. Not having been satisfied with those academic accomplishments, he enrolled at the University of Murcia in Spain and obtained a licentiate in philology. And to add some more weight to his resume, he obtained a law degree from the Universidad Autónoma de Santo Domingo and becomes a lawyer in 1990 for the second time in his life. Having put on hold his continued formal education, but with the same characteristic fervor and energy, he turned to public service for the community. On his first try at elected office in 1989, he is elected an at-large member of the Elizabeth Board of Education for a 3-year term, and he contributes to the appointment of the first Hispanic superintendent for the City of Elizabeth Board of Education. He was twice appointed to the prestigious position of member of the State Board of Education, first by Governor Florio in 1992, and later reappointed by Governor Whitman. With the assistance of other leaders and distinguished members of our community, he began a voters registration and education effort aiming at raising political awareness in the Hispanic community. He was a founding member of the Hispanic American Association for Political Awareness, also known as HAPA, and was his president for more than 10 years. He ran at large for a city in the Elizabeth City Council in 1992 and was elected and re-elected, serving 2 consecutive 4-year terms as councilman at large, receiving the largest number of votes of any candidate except our extremely popular mayor. I can confidently say that during his tenure in public service, the Hispanic community's presence grew in influence in the municipal, county, and state government. Many were a first. The first Hispanic municipal court judge in Elizabeth. He worked to increase the number of Hispanic police and firemen. The first municipal department head. He was instrumental in promoting the appointment of the first Hispanic judge of workers' compensation in the state of New Jersey and the first Hispanic judge to the Superior Court of the state of New Jersey for the County of Union. Continuing advancing and promoting the interest of the Hispanic community, Dr. Edreira was also instrumental in persuading the Democratic political apparatus to carry a Hispanic as a candidate for county freeholder on the ticket. The candidate became the first Hispanic freeholder in Union County and served in that office for 21 years. Dr. Edreira has authored books and presented many research papers. Most recently, he published an iconography of the life of his grandfather, an interesting read. The grandchild of Juan Gilberto Gomez, whose slave parents bought his freedom at birth, later became the director of the Revolutionary Party in the War of Independence against Spain, and a trusted friend and confidant of the Cuban apostle José Martí. Dr. Edreira inherits and embodies the indomitable fighting spirit and independence of his grandfather. He is an ambassador of the Hispanic community to the greater community. He has rightfully earned a place in the history books of the city of Elizabeth for his contributions on behalf of the Hispanic community. On February 25, 2021, at 7 a.m., the gates of heaven opened and the arms of God stretched down to earth, bringing into his kingdom one of our best. Although Dr. Edreira was not a person of a large physical stature, he was truly a giant among us. Thank you all for being part of this magnificent event when we honor the life of a great leader, Dr. Orlando Edreira.